Welcome to Soho's Penning the Past series. I'm Dean Glass, and I'm so glad you're joining us today as we continue to explore the many layers of San Diego's rich and surprising history. This month, we take to the skies, literally, as we welcome Dr. Gary Fogel for the Torrey Pines Gliderport and Wind and Wings, the History of Soaring in San Diego. A passionate researcher, historian, and a lifelong aero modeler, Gary brings a unique blend of scientific expertise and personal devotion to preserving aviation history. He currently serves as CEO of Natural Selection Incorporated, a San Diego-based firm applying artificial intelligence and machine learning across multiple disciplines. With a background spanning biology, earth science, computer science, and aerospace engineering, Gary has published extensively on the evolution of flight and motorless aviation. He and his father, Larry, were instrumental in designating the Torrey Pines Gliderport as a historic site in the 1990s with support from SOHO. And just this year, he was inducted into the Academy of Model Aeronautics Hall of Fame. Today, Gary will guide us through more than a century of innovation and daring, from John J. Montgomery's pioneering glider flights in the 1880s to the golden era of soaring at Torrey Pines in the 1930s. Along the way, we'll meet the aviation pioneers who helped elevate gliding into an art form. Gary's research is as rigorous as it is inspiring, and he'll also share why preserving aviation landmarks like Torrey Pines is more important than ever. We're honored to have him with us. And as always, please enter your questions into the chat feature, and Gary will answer them at the end of the program. And now, please join me in welcoming Gary Fogel.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you again for that introduction, and thank you to SOHO for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be speaking here to this group. Can you see the screen okay, Dean?
Yes, yeah, we sure can.
Okay, I again appreciate the opportunity. I'm going to take you on a journey, and it's a journey of not only the history, but also how that technology that had been developed at places like the Torrey Pines Gliderport has affected other types of aviation and technology as we go forward, even into the present and future. In the 1880s, very fortunately, here in San Diego, just south of San Diego near Chula Vista, was a gentleman named John Montgomery experimenting with gliders, powerless aircraft, in the 1880s, 1883 to 1886, a series of 3 gliders that were manned, different types of control systems, different types of airfoils, testing his theories of aerodynamics. He's credited as having the first controlled flight in the US, albeit unpowered, with successful control. And from those experiments, he devised his own theories about aerodynamics. He later developed other gliders in the 1905 timeframe that were flown in the Bay Area, lofted aloft with balloons, and then launched from balloons and gliding back down again. Here in San Diego, we have a Montgomery Memorial. You're probably familiar with it down near Chula Vista. It's a big, large wing that's dedicated to his memory. It's a California historic landmark. There's a whole other lecture I could give on John Montgomery. I will not do that today, but a great life, very early experimenter, and really bringing gliding to San Diego for the first time. Between Montgomery's flights and about 1909, there really wasn't a lot of interest in gliding. People were wondering if powered flight would ever happen. When it happened with the Wright brothers, they were still wondering if it was going to be a reality. It was still this mystical thing. Are we ever really going to fly or not? After the Wright brothers and powered flight started to take off in 1903 to 1908 or so, people got interested and wanted to be able to fly themselves. Gliding became a less expensive way of getting into the air. And an article was published on how to make a glider in Popular Aviation, Popular Science, Popular Mechanics, all the same kind of form of this diagram you're seeing on the right-hand side that people could build in their garage and then go out and fly with their friends from hillsides. And you can see a version of that on the left in 1909. Very fragile aircraft, very fragile kind of hang gliders. You get up only a certain altitude, 10 feet off the ground, and come land back down again. Usually pulled by a rope with your friends pulling, or a car pulling the glider aloft. And if you can just stay up for 10 seconds, 20 seconds while you're having a wonderful experience. Hopefully it survives, and hopefully you survive too. One of the earliest pilots in San Diego to use one of those kinds of hang gliders was Waldo Waterman. In 1909, he made a glider flight off of a hillside at the north end of Albatross Street in Bankers Hill. There's a plaque there in a nice city park that's been dedicated recently to his honor. Just down a gentle hillside, one of the first flights in San Diego City proper. Still, though, these were very small flights in very disparate areas of America, mainly with young people trying their efforts at flying on the cheap. It wasn't until 1911 that Orville Wright went back to Kitty Hawk, specifically with the idea of flying in a motorless aircraft to see if he could remain aloft on the sand dunes of Kitty Hawk without an engine. If the winds that are very strong at Kitty Hawk hit the ridges of the sand dunes, they have no choice but to go up. And if you're flying in a machine that has a descent rate that's less than the wind going up, you might be able to remain aloft or even gain altitude like a bird would. And Orville Wright was the first to demonstrate that that was possible in the world. He did that in October of 1911, staying aloft, hovering over the dunes at Kitty Hawk for 9 minutes and 42 seconds without an engine. And that made world news that this was possible, not only that Orville Wright did it, but that people could learn how to fly in a plane for more than just seconds without a motor. Again, that was a neat thing. That was fun, but people in America really started not getting interested in gliding. They were more interested in powered flight from 1911 into the 1920s. Powered aircraft became very adept at combat in World War I, and part of the Treaty of Versailles that ended that war forbid the Germans from using powered aircraft. It was written into the treaty. The Germans, still wanting to fly, though, began experimenting with gliders. That was still okay. And from many hillsides in Germany, started advancing gliding tremendously in the 1920s. It wasn't until the late 1920s that America kind of had this renewed romance with aviation, largely because of Charles Lindbergh's crossing of the Atlantic and Amelia Earhart's efforts in aviation. And again, this kind of renaissance of people getting interested in gliding because it was the inexpensive way of getting into the air and seeing what it was like. Gliding started to become interesting again in about 1928 in America. One of the kids that grew up in that time frame was a gentleman named William Hawley Bowlus. He grew up in the San Fernando Valley north of Los Angeles, and as a youngster built 15 of his own gliders from 1911 to 1929, different types of hang gliders, more complex designs over time, and went through World War I, got out of World War I safely, and after the war really was a very adept designer and builder of aircraft, having done so much during his life. He was hired by Ryan Aircraft here in San Diego to be a designer of aircraft. And then when Charles Lindbergh wrote to Ryan to say, hey, could you build an aircraft that could cross the Atlantic, Bowlus was the man who was the superintendent of construction to get that plane out the door on time from Ryan. And of course he did. And of course that ended up being great success. And a great relationship was built between Lindbergh and Bowlus. And after Lindbergh's success, Bowlus became a recognized name nationally for his prowess at making aircraft and getting them out the door. Right after that, though, he said, I really want to build a new type of glider, a glider that's more like what the Germans are doing, something that's very sleek and specifically aerodynamic and designed to try to do soaring, designed to do what Orville Wright had done back in 1911, but to do it even better than that. And this was the first true sailplane of American design and construction. You can see it pictured on the bottom right at Lindbergh Field. Very sleek, very lightweight, designed to minimize drag as much as possible, no motor needed. This was test flown at Bonita, hillsides in Bonita, and also Lindbergh Field. It had some very unusual characteristics for an aircraft. If you're familiar with aircraft, it has a rudder and an elevator like normal, but it had these tip ailerons, these ailerons that could twist at the tips, again, hopefully to minimize drag. He tried different ailerons and their type. Again, always experimenting to try to do control systems and get things more efficient with time. But this was a much, much, much more efficient glider, a true sailplane, than many of the other gliders that were around at the time. Very advanced. I should make sure that the audience is understanding that gliding and soaring are very different things. For gliders like the times that were hang gliders in the 1909 timeframe, you would take to the top of a hill with your best friends hauling it up the hill with you. You jump and you fly down the hill and land, and then walk it all the way back up so your next best friend could take the flight and try again. And that was a lot of fun. That was great. But these kind of gliders are so draggy, they're only possible to go downhill. They could never attain enough altitude out of soaring out of the atmosphere to be able to stay aloft. Sailplanes, because they're designed to be so efficient and such low drag, that it is possible, if you know where you're flying in the atmosphere, like a place like this where a wind is hitting a ridge, that wind gets deflected up like an inverted waterfall of air. And if you know where that is, you can stay in those regions and soar like a bird back and forth with no motor and extracting all that energy that's there in the atmosphere. You have to know what the atmosphere is doing. You have to have a sailplane, an aircraft that could do that in an efficient way. And Bowlus was really one of the first in America to hit on that. Here in San Diego and in Southern California during the 1928 to 1930 timeframe, we had 3 large glider contests. Of course, when there's more than one glider around, people wonder who's the best. And that was the case in Long Beach in May of 1929. That's the first glider contest on the West Coast. We had two glider contests here in San Diego on the south side of Mount Soledad facing Pacific Beach. The first one over July 4th weekend, the next one over Labor Day weekend, again, to test to see who in Southern California had the best gliders. People came to these regionally, Long Beach, Riverside, LA, San Diego, all around the coast as clubs to come and see who performed the best. Most of the entrants in these kinds of glider meets were flying these types of primary gliders. These are instructional gliders, lots and lots and lots of drag, especially because of this open fuselage here making lots of drag. The poor pilot's on a seat, no cockpit around them, just a seat and a stick and rudder pedals. And you're very happy to be able to glide down a hill in a controlled fashion. These gliders were launched using a shock cord or a bungee cord, similar we would do for bungee jumping today, but you stretch it out here, you can see this line across the image. You have some of your best friends on one end, some of your other best friends off the image here, and your true best friend holding onto the rope at the back of the glider. And they stretch the bungee out into a V, like a slingshot, and when your best friend can't hold onto the rope any longer, you're shot off the side of the hill, and then it's your job to keep flying as long as you can. These contests would have distance contest, altitude contest, duration, things of that nature. And you get launched, and there you are flying over the south side of Mount Soledad towards Pacific Beach and Mission Bay in the background you can see, and this is Foothill Boulevard today. Bowlus entered his number 16 sailplane against these other clubs and he won every possible event except for the altitude contest. There was one primary glider that was launched so strongly, he went up into a stall, peaked, barely cleared the bushes without killing himself and kept going, so they gave him the altitude cup for being such a good adept pilot at saving his life. But Bowlus would outperform everything with this glider and realized that he had something very special with this sailplane. So he lived in Point Loma, and realizing that the promontory of Point Loma also is a north-south ridge that faces a daily westerly breeze, that wind would be deflected up just like anywhere like I showed you in these diagrams. And if you launched a sailplane into that lift, you'd probably be able to stay up for quite a long time. So launching off of the road that we today use for the entrance for Cabrillo National Monument, he was able to make several flights, the first flight of 1 hour duration in America's history, several flights going up to 9 hours of duration in a sailplane, again, no motor, landing back on the road that we would use at Cabrillo National Monument. Some of these landings happening at nighttime with cars illuminating the road for his runway. And this was all right at the same time as the Great Depression. So in the papers, of course, the newspapers and the news of that day was not very nice, wonderful times. But here we have a gentleman in San Diego flying without a motor, doing amazing things that would still make it into the newspapers around the nation. New York Times, Chicago Tribune, a very uplifting story. One of his students, Jack Barstow, in April of 1930, flew in a Bowlus sailplane at Point Loma for 15 hours. And that was longer than the Germans were flying at the time, the first time that an American had eclipsed the German records that were held. Unfortunately, Jack Barstow did not have the equipment on board for that flight to be considered an official world record. So it was an unofficial world record, but it still showed that finally America was kind of back on par with the Germans. I'll speak today again about several different locations. The first one was this Otay Mesa location where John Montgomery was flying near the United States-Mexico border. I've talked about Point Loma. I'm going to talk briefly more about Mount Soledad and the Torrey Pines Gliderport coming up. Hearing the news of Bowlus's accomplishments with endurance records for soaring in the New York Times, Charles Lindbergh read about this and said, I know Bowlus, I remember him from the Spirit of St. Louis. I really want to check out what this is about. I think it'd be great to go out to San Diego and learn from Bowlus about how to do this soaring. So both Charles Lindbergh and his wife, Anne Lindbergh, came out to San Diego in January of 1930, specifically to do just that, just learn how to fly gliders. Now, of course, Charles and Anne had both had experience as powered pilots, Charles having more experience than Anne as a powered pilot, but they set up Charles Lindbergh in a glider at Point Loma in January 1930, launched him off the side of the mountain. He was able to soar back and forth without a problem and land, no problem. Thinks it's great, wonderful. Anne wants to try. And at that time, very few women were flying gliders. There were 3 different levels of glider licenses at the time: a third class, second class, and first class glider license. A first class glider license required a 6-minute duration flight, which back then, again, was very difficult to do. Most people were flying for just seconds and being happy. Anne, very courageous woman, wants to do gliding, has never done it before. They took her to Lindbergh Field, and the training session was being towed with a glider behind the car with a rope, driving around Lindbergh Field for a while until you get up off the ground for maybe seconds at a time, get to feel what the controls are like. Okay, that's good. We'll land. We'll go have lunch. We'll drive up to the top of Mount Soledad. We'll put you in the glider. We're going to launch you off the top of the mountain and have a good flight. And very courageous. She was able to soar for more than 6 minutes on that flight off of the top of Mount Soledad, and became the first woman in America to receive a first-class glider license. That was also the first glider flight off of Mount Soledad. Those flights were, if you're familiar with Mount Soledad, more where the radio towers are today than where the cross is located. So the more northwest-facing area of the mountain. Later the next month, Charles Lindbergh launched at the same location from Mount Soledad and went on a soaring flight north towards the cliffs of Torrey Pines, because he reasoned that the cliffs there should also have this updraft of lift from the westerly breeze. And he soared all the way past the cliffs and landed on the beach at Del Mar. That was the first person to use the lift at Torrey Pines for soaring, was Charles Lindbergh, and set a 20-minute soaring flight. And it was also a regional distance record for gliders at the time. No one had ever flown that far with a glider. And I've got some pictures to show you of these experiments by the Lindberghs here in San Diego. This is a picture of Anne Lindbergh on the right and Hawley Bowlus on the left in a primary glider used for instruction at Lindbergh Field, towed behind the car in the morning. All good. And then that afternoon in January, here's Anne Lindbergh being launched off the top of a mountain, top of Mount Soledad, with Charles Lindbergh in the bottom right corner, wondering if that's such a smart idea. But anyway, she was able to get her license off of this flight. Here's a picture of Charles Lindbergh in the cockpit of a Bowlus sailplane at Mount Soledad, being launched off of Mount Soledad for his flight towards Torrey Pines and Del Mar. Again, most of the people are going to fall over in this picture because all the energy is coming out of the shock cord and as they launch the glider. And this is the landing near Del Mar. If you're familiar with Del Mar and the train tracks that are on the cliffs, this is where the train tracks are, and the trestles, the bridge would be just off the right of the image that's shown here today. When this happened, this flight happened, this made huge regional news that this aircraft had made an emergency landing on the beach with no motor. The motor must have fallen off somehow. And people drove to help the rescue effort, and they realized that, wow, it was Charles Lindbergh in the cockpit hopping out of the sailplane. Oh my goodness. And he had to explain to everyone, no, it's all okay. Everything's good. Let's help take the plane apart. They're going to come get me, and everything's fine. But the fact that Charles Lindbergh was flying gliders in San Diego made huge regional news, and now all these kids wanted to get into gliding because the Lindberghs are doing this here. Bowlus, again, recognizing he had something special going on, set up a factory, the Bowlus Sailplane Company in San Diego. This was in the same tuna cantering building that was used for the building of the Spirit of St. Louis. It's a building that still exists within the Solar Turbines factory near Lindbergh Field, and he starts producing sailplanes for sales nationally. He also sets up a Bowlus glider school. 9 of the 10 first people to win a first-class glider license in America came out of the Bowlus Glider School here in San Diego. This is at the Air Tech hangar on Lindbergh Field, very close to the United Airlines hangar that is now being recovered on the east side of Lindbergh Field. And if you're familiar with gliding, many of the faces here are very famous names, but Bowlus here is very proud of his students all learning. All of a sudden, here after January and February 1930, regionally, a lot of glider clubs start popping up. Different little locations, different cities, different groups everywhere. Pacific Beach has their own glider club. Escondido has a glider club. Long Beach has a glider club. They all came together and realized that they would have more political clout if they formed an association, kind of like the AAA of cars. But we called it the Associated Glider Clubs of Southern California, the AGCSC, to represent them, to help protect and find new flying sites, to represent them to politicians to say, hey, these are important things for kids to be doing to get into aviation. This is now America's oldest operating glider club. They still operate mainly in Jacumba, East County, San Diego, but again, formed in late 1929 into early 1930. In addition, many of the high schools, particularly San Diego High School and La Jolla High School here in San Diego, had fantastic woodshop classes with fantastically open-minded woodshop instructors. Lee Tane Kittredge, the woodshop instructor at San Diego High School, had flown in World War I, very adept pilot. The kids came to him and said, "We want to build gliders, not desks and chairs. Can you help us build gliders?" And he said, "Sure, we'll build gliders." So the woodshop, particularly at San Diego High School, turned out lots and lots of gliders, with Lee Tane Kittredge, the instructor, the woodshop instructor, taking the first flight, making sure that everything's okay, and then, "Okay, kids, this is yours. You have fun. Go find a hillside and fly." So this is the 1933 class at San Diego High School launching their Bowlus replica, if you will, that was built at San Diego High School. This is off of Loma Portal. There used to be a nice hillside off of Loma Portal, just near Midway. This is them having a fun day launching their glider. Lots and lots and lots of students coming out of high school, already knowing how to build aircraft, already knowing how to fly aircraft, and looking for every hillside in San Diego to fly from. Those high school students recognized that, well, if the lift at Torrey Pines is good enough for Charles Lindbergh, it must be good enough for us. So they would take their gliders the weekends from San Diego High School, trailer them up to the beach north of Torrey Pines, where the grade comes down. You can get a Model T onto the beach, and tow the glider up into the air using a rope, release from the rope, and then you can soar back and forth on the lift from the cliff and come land back down on the beach. That was a great idea. That worked well. Everyone who else wanted to use the beach, fishermen, everyone else was like, why are you flying aircraft from the beach? It doesn't make any sense. We want to cast our fishing line. You're in the way. But these students were young and not sure of launching their aircraft off of the 350-foot cliff that was next door. Very, very fortunately for them, a gentleman named Woody Brown came from New York, already with gliding experience. He was a surfer. He lived in La Jolla. He saw these kids flying their gliders on the beach at Torrey Pines, said, "Well, I can help you out. Let's launch from the top of the cliff. I'll show you how." And he was the first pilot to launch and land a glider from the top rather than on the beach, and began training all these young kids in how to do that effort. Right away, you get a very big infusion of these kids flying at Torrey Pines Gliderport. It becomes like the only skate park in town for skateboarding. It is the place to go, and all the kids start migrating towards the Gliderport. So popular was it that by the end of 1938, they hold an opening ceremony for the Gliderport, although it had been used for many years already by that time. But the mayor of San Diego came out and dedicated the Gliderport to the youth of California as this open resource, this open wind tunnel to go experiment with their own designs in a safe, open fashion over the beach. Many students, I'll talk specifically about John Robertson coming up later on in the talk, and about Woody Brown. Here's a picture on Black's Beach, north of the cliffs, of a two-place primary glider. So you see two control sticks. This is a student, David Robertson, in high school. This is another high school student, Mary Wind, taking instruction. There's no FAA. There's no examination on how to be a good instructor. You're just flown a bit, so okay, you're going to teach the next student, and off you go. No insurance issues, no worries. Let's go. Much different time. This is John Robinson after high school. This is Woody Brown. John became a very adept welder of steel. He was very trained in that art, and started making steel tube construction fuselages for gliders. These are all steel tube with fabric to make it a lighter weight construction than a wooden fuselage, and stronger. They started producing their own aircraft, designing their own aircraft, making all sorts of design changes and trying that at Torrey Pines Gliderport. And together, Woody and John did some fantastic things. Here's a picture from Woody Brown's cockpit looking down at John Robinson's aircraft flying towards La Jolla in 1937 with the Scripps Pier in the distance and La Jolla shores. The lift is just the same today. It's just the scenery that's changed. And right away, there was a very large gliderport that was set up on the cliffs. In the soaring community, this became nationally known by about 1938. It had 3 runways for different wind directions. Those 3 runways were pictured here in a photo from 1937 with the trees that are now Torrey Pines Road in the background here and UCSD behind that. The main runway still exists. You can see it here. The cross runway is a little slightly different location, but it's still a cross runway. This north-south runway no longer exists today. They also invented methods for taking off from this little short field that exists on the cliff edge. You had to get to speed to launch very quickly, and some poor person has to be driving the tow car at high speed right towards the cliff edge and then stop in time. In order to have the tow car not have to drive so quickly, they devised this auto tow pulley takeoff system that also became very popular nationally for short fields, for short takeoff fields. This was also used in training for gliders in World War II. I'll talk about that coming up. Very large glider meets were held at the Torrey Pines Gliderport. Again, it became regionally very famous very quickly. This is a picture from 1940. Almost every glider that's pictured here is a Bowlus type of glider, a Bowlus sailplane. He kept designing sailplanes and refining his designs, selling kits of different ones, very popular kits. This is a baby albatross, became a very popular design, and people would still compete at the Gliderport. But then I should also mention John Robinson continued on, found his way to own this glider, which was a very, very famous and very important glider in America's history called the Zenonia. It was the highest performance sailplane in America at the time. This glider has a 30-to-1 glide ratio. It means for every 1 foot that it falls down in the air, it goes 30 feet forward, which is an amazing angle of glide at the time. Most were like 20-to-1, he's 30-to-1. So he can outperform almost every other sailplane that's there. And he was already a very well-trained pilot by the time he acquired this glider. He actually bought it from Woody Brown. And he used the lifted Torrey Pines and his efforts to fly on the weekends to really hone in this aircraft and his skill with this aircraft, optimizing everything about it. Where's the right center of gravity? Where's the right center of pressure? How do I minimize every little piece of drag on this aircraft? Really getting to know his craft. I'll come back to that aircraft and John in just a second. Woody Brown also, flying at Torrey Pines every weekend, refined his aircraft. This is a Bowlus baby albatross that he bought called the Thunderbird. And with this aircraft, he, John Robinson, and another gentleman, Alan Esri, started to go nationally to competitions to see how well they could do. At a contest in Wichita Falls, Texas, Woody Brown declared that he was going to fly all the way over Oklahoma and land in Wichita, Kansas that day, 280 miles. No one had ever flown so far, especially to a prescribed goal flight. He looked at the weather and thought it was going to be a good day. He climbed aboard his aircraft, took a ham sandwich along, and 8 hours later, he's landing in Wichita, Kansas, all the way over Oklahoma. He forgot to eat the sandwich. He was a little bit busy during the whole day. That was an amazing accomplishment for an American. It was a world record at the time. He got a telegram from the President of the United States thanking him for that accomplishment. It's amazing. Ripley's Believe It or Not covered it. Just an amazing feat. Woody Brown was an amazing individual. I had the pleasure of knowing and interviewing both Woody and John as preparation of the material that I'm presenting today. Woody, again, came to San Diego already understanding gliding and getting into surfing. He was one of the first surfers at Wind and Sea in La Jolla. Thought that these gentlemen carrying heavy wooden plank boards, long boards, there's got to be a lighter board construction. Why don't we make the surfboards hollow with ribs like an airplane wing and cover them with plywood, but they'll be much lighter weight than these heavy full plank wood boards. So some of the first hollow surfboards are Woody's design. He also was one of the inventors of the skeg, a fin that's in the back to help with direction of the board, just like a rudder on a sailplane, taking that technology and putting it on a surfboard. Also, Woody Brown later migrated from San Diego to Hawaii, and he was one of the first Caucasians to surf the big waves on the north shore of Oahu, opening up Waimea and others for surfing. If you go to the Surfing Hall of Fame, Woody Brown's in the Surfing Hall of Fame. He also was very interested in Polynesian designs for sailing, specifically the catamaran. Made the first modern catamaran, the Monokai, in 1947, taking tourists on very fast sailboat rides off of Waikiki. That became exceptionally popular. One of the people that took a ride on the Monokai was a gentleman named Hobie Alter. Hobie and Woody got to be really good friends in surfing and in sailing. And Hobie was like, Woody, you've got a great idea here. You should patent the catamaran and start selling catamarans. I think it's a good idea. And Woody was like, no, I'm just happy giving people rides in Hawaii. If you want to do that, you go ahead. Hobie went ahead and patented the catamaran. The Hobie Cat was the result. Hobie Alter also started making radio-controlled model sailplane designs in the 1970s. So full circle, they were both into soaring and sailing at the same time, just trying to not compete with nature, but give what nature gives and then use that energy for fun in 3 different disciplines. During that time, though, we entered World War II, and we needed aviators quickly. We needed aviators for lots of different purposes. In World War II, gliders were used extensively for aerial assaults, like Normandy, invasion of Normandy, things of that nature, flying these very, very large troop transport gliders that could carry 16 troops or a Jeep inside, typically towed behind a C-47, a DC-3 equivalent, over into enemy lines, behind enemy lines at nighttime, released from the rope, You have to fly your glider and land in a field at night to pre-station the troops behind an assault. The pilots of these gliders, unfortunately, had one of the highest death rates in World War II for piloting. Armed with a pistol, their mission was to land the glider, get back through enemy lines, get back through your own lines that are making the assault, to then go do the glider mission again. So very difficult missions. Those glider pilots were trained in two-person, two-place sailplanes of this nature that were also built during the war. And after the war, were sold at surplus. And lots and lots of glider pilots bought up that surplus with these great sailplanes that were built during the war and used them afterwards. Today, they are the Vintage Sailplane Association is doing these kinds of things. They're like vintage cars. People keep them going. Bowlus kept designing things. So during World War II, he designed a very large troop transport glider called the XCG-16 with two very large doors that would open up here to have troops rolling out or jeeps rolling out. They made two of these, but never went into production because the war ended at the time. Bowlus also made a trailer for towing an RV behind you when you're going to a glider contest. You can bring your hotel with you. His wife was very happy with that rather than having to stay in the tent every time. You can see the aerodynamics of this design to make it as streamlined as possible. This predates the Airstream trailer. It is one of the first, probably the first RV in America. Was, again, an aviation applied to road design for aerodynamics. During World War II, the entire gliderport at Torrey Pines was deeded back to the city and then back to the U.S. government for purpose of having U.S. Army Camp Cowan, a training facility that would put through 15,000 troops in 13-week cycles of learning, typically for cliff invasion. So how do you scale cliffs, and also for anti-aircraft training, ironically. Very large artillery revetments were set up, and also for coastal defense of San Diego if there was an invasion. By the end of that time period, most of the buildings and wood that was associated with Camp Cowan was declared surplus. That material ended up becoming part of the material that was used to build La Jolla after World War II. So some of the houses made use of that material. But Camp Cowan, again, lots and lots of effort. It transitioned very quickly from being a glider port to an anti-aircraft facility of large significance to America's development and history and invasions of Europe. And then as soon as the war was over, the Associated Glider Clubs of Southern California went right back to the city of San Diego and said, can we please get a lease again for the glider port? And they got that lease. So right as soon as 1946 into 1947, gliders were flying back at Torrey Pines again. And they started holding a wintertime contest here in San Diego, the Pacific Coast Midwinter Soaring Championships. When it's snowing and raining in the rest of America, everyone comes to San Diego and enjoys the sunshine in February and March and the good wind we have in that time frame to compete for distance and duration and different things. One of the competition categories was a bomb drop. As you go up the winch line to take off, you drop a sack of flour or a sack of sand out the window to try to hit a target. It was just after World War II, so we're still bombing things, but we're doing it from gliders. Typically, they would launch either from a winch, hauling the glider in with a line like you'd reel in a kite and haul up the glider, or by aerotow, towing the glider up with another powered aircraft to a higher altitude and releasing from the rope. The longest flight from these contests that we're aware of from Torrey Pines was a flight of 183 miles to Brawley, California, all the way near El Centro, which is an amazing achievement. John Robinson also flew from Torrey Pines in his Zenonia sailplane all the way up the coastline to Oceanside without turning. So just think about a sailplane going all the way past Del Mar and Carlsbad and Leucadia and all that stuff. Just this thing silently flying by and landing on the beach 30 miles to the north. Every meet, they'd have a glider queen for the queen. And one of the glider queens in one year was Raquel Tejada, recently out of La Jolla High School. She became famous as the Raquel Welsh later on, but one of her first gigs was at the Torrey Pines glider meet. And these glider meets became exceptionally popular as a spectator sport. This was one of the very first times that gliding was so close to a major population in America that it could be televised, it could be watched. Usually soaring is go off to the distance to some other backwoods place. You launch, you go far away, no one sees you. This was gliding right in front of people. Very spectacular soaring right on the coastlines of San Diego and La Jolla, up close and personal. You could wave, you could yell at the glider pilots, they can yell back. It's just a lot of fun to be that close to soaring pilots. And you can see tens of thousands of people would show up at these competitions on the weekends to watch the spot landing competition. If you're familiar with the gliderport, this is where the Salk Institute is, all these cars and trees and people. Here's a picture from the other direction where the cars were parked towards the gliding landing area and the golf course behind. When the wind quits, there's no lift, and the only option is to land on the beach below. Again, that's Black's Beach down there. They would take a powered aircraft, go land on the beach, and haul them back up again to bring them back up to the top of the cliff, if that ever happened. It was a rare thing, but sometimes would happen. But again, very popular destination, nationally recognized as being the most important place to be, especially in the wintertime for San Diego. I mentioned earlier John Robinson, again, the San Diego High School grad. All that training in Torrey Pines, once he was equipped with the Zenonia sailplane, he became the first 3-time national soaring champion that America's ever had. He also was the first American to fly 300 miles in a sailplane, that Zenonia sailplane, first to fly over 30,000 feet high in the atmosphere, also in that Zenonia sailplane. Most importantly, the first pilot in the world to earn soaring's highest achievement honor, the Diamond C badge. There are other honors that have happened now later that are more impressive than the Diamond C, but at the time, that was a very, 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 very hard badge to earn, and he was the first to earn it coming from San Diego, kind of like the Tiger Woods of his time. And he credited Torrey Pines with all that success, all that testing as his outdoor wind tunnel with this sailplane. He was really the top champion. Not long after John Robinson, a gentleman named Paul McCready also started flying at Torrey Pines. Many hours training himself at Torrey Pines and other locations in Southern California, and he became the next 3-time national soaring champion in 1948, 49, and 53, and also became the first American to win an international world soaring contest. He credited Torrey Pines with all of his passion of doing more with less, trying to be more efficient at all times in any design. How do you do that? And Paul had an amazing life. Again, I had the pleasure of knowing Paul very well. He was the designer of the Gossamer Condor, the first human-powered aircraft to cross the English Channel with a bicyclist powering this propeller in the back, again, optimized to be as efficient as possible. The Solar Challenger, first solar-powered aircraft to cross the English Channel, a Pathfinder unmanned aircraft to fly at 80,000 feet for reconnaissance purposes. He was the designer of the EV1, GM's electric car that was very early, way earlier than the Prius. So early it didn't catch on, but if it was around today, you can see the aerodynamics of this car. And he also made a flying, flapping pterodactyl for IMAX movies. Also, I'm remiss to mention, if I do not mention Helen Dick, she also learned how to fly at Torrey Pines, and she was America's first woman to earn the Diamond C badge. Did some also incredible achievements in soaring based on her flying at Torrey Pines. I've mentioned 2 types of flying, the ridge soaring that's possible at Torrey Pines. Thermal soaring you can use for thermal currents to go cross-country like they did in the 1930s. There's also this other type called wave soaring, where a very, very large wind stream, like the jet stream, hits a very, very large mountain range like the Sierra Nevada and creates a long ripple behind it in the atmosphere of ups and downs. And the ups are going up tremendously fast, let's say 1,000 feet per minute of air going up, and the downs are just the opposite of that, 1,000 feet per minute going down. And if you are a very good pilot and you know what you're doing, you can fly in these blue regions and go up to tremendous altitudes. 30,000 feet is not a problem. If you get between these areas, there's tremendous turbulence enough to rip the planes apart. So you have to be very careful about what you're doing. And lots of the San Diegans went out and helped explore that Sierra wave that helps explain the clear air turbulence we feel when we are in passenger jets today when we get the bumping sensation. That's you flying through a wave. But also these kinds of things could be used for world records. One La Jolla, Bill Ivins, who was also a sailplane pilot who learned how to fly at Torrey Pines, set a world record for altitude. He flew up to 42,000 feet in the Sierra wave, altitude gain of 30,000 feet. His home in La Jolla was recently designated on the National Register of Historic Places, this unusual architecture, and the people that helped do that restoration were recognized as Soho People and Preservation Awardees in 2022. So both an architectural and a soaring history. Today we have an effort that's being launched in South America with American pilots called the Perlon 2 project. They've flown to 76,000 feet with pressurized suits and everything in this Airbus-funded effort to fly to 100,000 feet in the wave effort over the Andes Mountains, just to see if that's possible. This was an aircraft that was test loaded. It was tested in Poway here in San Diego. Since sailplane pilots are so interested in efficiency, Parts of aircraft designs now show up everywhere else. So winglets used to prevent turbulence at the tips of wings now show up on commercial jets to help with fuel efficiency. Spoilers that are used to help land a sailplane because it's so efficient to land it in a smaller area are now used on commercial jets to help bring the jets down and keep them on the runway when they land. So lots of technology that has been in sailplanes has been used elsewhere in commercial aviation. And again, the Gliderport has been home to many different other types of aircraft. So in the 1950s, amateur radio operators were wondering if they could take their radio technology and put it in free flight gliders to then control them with radio control over the cliffs. One of the first to do this was a dentist named Bob Chase here in San Diego, and he flew his radio controlled aircraft for 8 hours and 24 minutes over the cliffs of San Diego, setting a world record in 1956 for RC duration. People were flying RC since about 1953 or so at Torrey Pines. And people have been flying scale models, scale representations of the aircraft that would fly with radio control. In 1973, with the popular Jonathan Livingston Seagull book and movie that came out, they had a very difficult time making the seagulls train to do rolls or loops. They just wouldn't do it. So they hired a gentleman named Mark Smith, one of the modelers in our local Torrey Pines Gulls Club, to make radio controlled model seagulls and fly them for the movie. So part of that movie was filmed at Torrey Pines and also in Maui, having radio controlled birds do the aerobatics. But it's possible to use RC gliders on the cheap to do all sorts of different design efforts and try different new things to see if they work and how well they work. Also possible to recreate the past with model sailplanes that look like the real ones. One in particular, my friend Carl Gwartney, who's unfortunately no longer with us, he was a pilot of World War II gliders in various invasions in Europe. He made an RC model of one of his gliders and would fly that at Torrey Pines, recreating his own history in gliding. Other people like Dr. Scott Jenkins from the Scripps Research Institution in La Jolla got interested in RC gliding, also in manned soaring, and has transitioned his interests in aviation into underwater unmanned devices that can go for distance without need of power. So this is a glider. It goes at a 20-to-1 glide ratio. It takes its time through the ocean, but can do reconnaissance missions. It can do sampling missions in the ocean with no power necessary using gliding technology. San Diego and Torrey Pines also home to hang gliding and paragliding at the Torrey Pines Gliderport. Hang gliders starting flying there in the 1960s, paragliders in the late 1980s. And right away, 4 world records were set for hang gliding endurance at Torrey Pines. The first 1-hour flight in the world, 2-hour flight, 3-hour flight, almost the first 4-hour flight in the world were set at Torrey Pines. It's just that good of a site. It's like pipeline for surfing. When the wind is going and its lift is there, it's a great place to do soaring. This is what it's like to be in a hang glider at Torrey Pines, a beautiful view. And this is what it's like in a paraglider. Paragliders are basically like an airfoil shaped parachute that's collapsible, and you can fit it into a backpack. You come out at lunchtime, open your parachute up, launch off the cliff, soar for the hour, put it back away, go back to the office, and have a fun day. There are people that are trying to recreate the past using modern materials. This is a primary glider that's controlled like a primary glider would have been in 1930, but it's got modern techniques and modern materials to build it. And in this glider, you just roll off the side of the cliff and off you're flying. There are other people. This is an aircraft called the Swift, designed by a Stanford researcher, Dr. Elon Crow. It's between a hang glider and a sailplane. It's a foot-launched sailplane. You carry this entire wing on your shoulders. You run like crazy towards the cliff edge, you jump off the cliff edge, and you pull up your feet, and you're aerodynamic, and you have a control stick, like you can fly it like a sailplane. And then when you land, you either land on your butt on the skid below, or you land running really fast and come to a stop. But it's right between a hang glider and a sailplane. We used to, and we still hope to, fly sailplanes at the Gliderport, manned sailplanes like they would have in the 1930s. This is a restored vintage World War II training glider that we have in the club and enjoy still flying. When we get permission to fly, we launch them by winch or by auto tow. It's an amazing thing to be in the sailplane and experience the lift in the sailplane and land back at the Torrey Pines Gliderport. That takes a lot of permission. I'll get into that very briefly in just a second. It's also possible to fly in a motor glider. So there are people that fly motorized sailplanes out of Montgomery Field or other airports in San Diego, specifically designed to then launch in this kind of a beautiful, very aerodynamic, very sleek glider, and go out to Torrey Pines, turn off the motor, and soar back and forth like a sailplane, enjoy the day, and when you're done, you turn on the motor and go land back at Montgomery Field. So you can enjoy that aspect too. The lift is still present. You can see the motor feathered here for aerodynamic efficiency as we cruise the cliff. So Torrey Pines now represents this a very, very, very unique combination of coastal geology, wind that hits that cliff almost every day, sunshine in San Diego, and it's this now cultural landscape that has been used for soaring since 1930 for 300 days of the year that people recognize as being sort of Kitty Hawk of the West. And it really represents San Diego's 140 years of relationship with gliding back to John Montgomery's time. In the 1930s, gliding was so popular that there would be coastal glider ports all along California's coast up to Washington. Redondo Beach had a glider port. San Clemente was used for gliding. They on and on, Palos Verdes. But only one remains from that time frame, and that's the Torrey Pines Gliderport. It's like the last remaining roller coaster of its time. And has this now unique combination of silent air traffic, 4 different forms of flight, all motorless that want to share that resource. And it becomes one of the most visited glider ports in America because of its relationship so close to San Diego. People there try to do the mantras of doing more with less and working with nature rather than competing with it by putting a motor on the front. One of the complexities of the glider port is this property ownership issue. In the 1960s, as a part of bringing UC San Diego into effect, the city of San Diego deeded, the citizens of San Diego deeded half of the glider port to the UC Regents for the purpose of building UC San Diego. And this portion is the portion that's used mostly for the manned gliding. The coastal portion is a city park. It's City of San Diego property, and that's the coastal cliff portion that we use for the hang gliding, paragliding, and radio control model soaring. To get everything to happen all in a cohesive place requires the direction of 2 property owners, and that makes it a little bit difficult. Plus, in recent times, UC San Diego has chosen to build an 11-story dormitory facility here and a stem cell research facility at the eastern end of the glider port within the National Historic Registered property. And those were battles that we were very happy to have Soho on board with to help preserve the gliding for the future. So these buildings came at the request of still maintaining gliding for manned purposes if we can get that to happen in the future and currently in the future. Very fortunately, it's been dedicated, the Torrey Pines Gliderport has been dedicated as a National Soaring Landmark, a city historic site. It's on the California Register and on the National Register of Historic Places, the first glider port in America to have that honor. It's also listed as the America's first model aviation landmark. In 2003, I had the pleasure of setting up a new series of landmarks for model aviation, with Torrey Pines being chosen as the first site. And now we have, I think, 8 sites in America. There's a 9th one that's coming up based on this program. So preserving modeling history. Cabrillo is also honored as a National Soaring Landmark of importance for soaring in America. It also has a second plaque from the Environmental Trust honoring all the glider pilots that flew there in the 1930s. This plaque is just after the entrance to the Cabrillo National Monument. Next time you go through the gate, it's just there on the right. We've also made a wonderful video about the history that I've presented today. It's much better to see it in video form than the slides that I just showed, so I direct you to this YouTube link. Please do watch that video. It's fantastic and really presents the video, the scenery in a different, much better way. I've had the pleasure of writing 3 books on this history, Wind and Wings, that captures the history I talked to you today about from Montgomery to about 1950. A picture book for the public about the glider port, much more involved in the photos and how beautiful that was. And then a biography of John Montgomery and his efforts in manned gliding in early times. But for me, this is my outdoor playground. When I grew up, I had a wonderful family, wonderful parents that guided me and glided me all through my childhood. And aviation has been part of my life as a father-son duo since I can remember. So I try to instill that same enthusiasm in the students I teach at San Diego State in first year aerospace engineering, doing more with less, but let's all get out there and fly with model airplanes and experience it like we do today. So with that, I'm happy to conclude. I really want to thank, though, Soho's involvement in helping to preserve this resource. Without Soho's involvement, that would not have taken place. And we hope that if we ever need Soho's help again to keep this place going, that Soho will be there for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gary. That was great. If anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat feature. I'm not seeing any questions yet. You must have been really thorough.
Okay.
We'll give it a minute in case anybody pops in.
Not a problem.
Okay, I guess not. Anything else you'd like to share, Gary?
No, I just think again, it's a public resource. So if you and it's a very well-known tourist attraction. If next time you bring out your friends, hopefully you know a little bit more about the history. if you're interested in taking a flight in a hang glider or a paraglider, you can arrange that at the concessionaire's office there. If you're interested in a radio controlled gliding session, just go on up and ask any of the glider pilots there. They'll be happy to help you take a flight, see what it's like.
Great.
There might be one question.
Oh, I see that. Oops. Can one tour Torrey Pines?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Certainly, you can tour by the air if you'd like to take a flight, and that's up to you. There aren't a lot of walking tours of the history. I do walking tours every now and then. We can certainly arrange that through Soho if that's of interest. I'm happy to go do that to explain on the ground where certain things are. There are a few World War II things that remain, not a lot, unfortunately, but I can talk to you about the Camp Callan days or the early gliding efforts that have happened there and explain to you. But the best way to do it is to see it from the air, like I'm picturing you here. You really get a sense of why this is so important to preserve and why it's so unique if you're in the air above it.
Great. All right, then. Okay, thanks. Thanks, Gary. We appreciate you joining us today. And thanks to everybody else for joining us for this flight through San Diego's soaring history. We're grateful to Gary for sharing his insight, stories, and rare imagery that bring this remarkable era to life. Be sure to join us next month when architect and author David Marshall returns to share his extensive knowledge of San Diego's Balboa Park. And if you're not yet a Soho member, we'd love to welcome you. Membership starts at just $25 and includes free access to this series. Your support helps us preserve the places, stories, and history that make San Diego so unique. To learn more about Soho's mission, membership, and upcoming programs, visit us online at sohosandiego.org. You can also catch up on Penning the Past webinars from the past anytime on the Soho San Diego YouTube channel. And until next time, I'm Dean Glass, and I thank you for penning the past with us. Thank you, Gary. We appreciate you.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Soho.